Hey friends, it's Jess with Virtually Visual. If you're new to the channel, welcome, and if you're coming back, welcome back. Today I have something kind of fun. We're going to be creating this flower bouquet type of thing. I don't know if we want to call these flowers or trees, but they're kind of like an alien plant form of some sort. On Instagram, I think I call these bouquet for the Lorax, because it just reminds me of the thneed trees in the Lorax and just the bushy kind of structures. So we're going to be recreating this in Cinema 4D today, so let's dive right in. Just a reminder, I have a Gumroad shop with lots of goodies, both free and paid on there, and I recently released a material pack called Fluff Materials, and these are based off of image textures that I took of some of my own things around my place, different sweaters and blankets, just to kind of create something unique that nobody probably else has out there. So if you'd like to get these really fun fuzzy textures, they're free on my Gumroad, so feel free to click the link in the description to get those for yourself. To start us off with creating these structures, we're going to want a pretty big disc in here, and this is going to be the base that all of our structures attach to. So let's hit NB on our keyboard to see the segments, and just for a little bit of deep dive into the techniques here, we're going to be connecting our objects using the connector tag to the disk, and that's what they'll hold to when they're being pulled upward by a gravity force. So the thing is, though, stuff gets attached to vertices. So if we were to connect a cylinder to this right now, it would only make connections from that center point, and we don't want that. So we need more segments in here so that we can create more connections to our tree structures. So let's up our disk segments a lot, and then we're going to up our rotation segments as well, all the way up to 100. Let's set this at 50 for the disk segments and 100 for the rotation segments, and I think that's good. Then what we're going to do is we're going to start pulling in a cylinder. And I'm going to create one of these structures first, and then I'll speed up the rest of the process. To get us started here, I'm going to say like that for part of our cylinder, and then I'm going to hold Control and drag to create a copy. I'm going to resize this and rotate this and move it into place, kind of intersecting with our other cylinder. And then what we're going to do is we're going to grab a volume builder, hold this down and grab a volume mesher, and we're going to pull the volume builder into the volume mesher, and then bring those two cylinders into the volume builder. And it's going to look pretty low res right there. That's because we need to change our voxel size down to like 1 or 2. Let's try 1. And then I'm going to pull in an SDF smooth. And then we're not done here because this is a really heavy mesh. So we're going to hold down here on the subdivision surface, and we're going to go down and select this remesh option, and then drag our mesher into the remesh. So now I'm going to take adaptiveness all the way down, and I'm going to change our mesh density to maybe like 15. Let's see what we're like. So I think that's pretty good. And let's also make this symmetric on Z. And maybe we can even up this to 20. Cool. So I like that. And here we have our first tree structure. So I'm not going to just connect and delete because I want to keep this in case we want to make other cylinders from this. So I'm going to right click and hit current state to object, and that will create a new object from that. And I'm going to just hide our remesher for now. Let's rename our object to tree1, and that way we've got our first structure to work with. So I'm just going to copy this process, kind of play around with adding cylinders and changing up the shape to make a few more other tree structures that are different from this one. Okay, so I've made a handful of other tree structures now. Let me just enable them all so we can see them. These are all the structures that I've made that I'm going to be working with to kind of create this bouquet or tree series here. And first thing I want to do is now organize these so they almost all kind of seem to be kind of stemming from the same area, like a bouquet would be. So I'm going to just do that really quick, just kind of moving them into place. Okay, so now I've got all these kind of in the position that I want them to be in. And the next step is going to be actually getting them connected to our disk shape here. So I'm also going to turn off our work plane. I don't really need to see that. But let's go and on our disk, let's right click and go to simulation tags. We need a connector and we also need the cloth tag. And right away in here, I'm just going to go to with pins in the mix animation tab and check that, and with force. I don't want the disk itself to be moving. And then I'm going to highlight all our trees and I'm going to right click, go to simulation tags and also do balloon because I want these to be inflated a little bit. Let's set it to 2 for the overpressure. And let's go into surface and set the bendiness to 100 and the stretchiness to, I don't know, maybe 5 and thickness maybe to 1. So let's just start with that. And before we can do anything else, let's make sure we have our connections going. So I'm going to take this up to maybe 5 and hit create. And as you can see, if I zoom in a little bit here, we've now got connections stemming from all these different vertices onto our tree structures so that when we disable gravity, they are not floating away. Speaking of gravity, let's hit Control and D on our keyboard. And then we're going to go into Simulation tab, Scene, and we're going to turn off gravity. Or maybe even set it to like 100, just so they're floating up a little bit. Let's just see what that's like if we go and hit play. And you know what, maybe this gravity shouldn't be going in a positive direction at all. Maybe we just want it at 0 so that they just inflate. And let me increase my frames here to like 300. Yeah, I think that's smart. So if you wanted to do seaweed or some kind of coral, this would be a great way to just do that without adding any of the hair. I think it's super fun. But to make things a little bit more interesting, I'm also going to add in a turbulence force. So if you go up to simulate forces and add turbulence, let's set the strength to 10, the scale maybe to 15, and let's change this to force, and let's just see what that's looking like. So I think that's fun, but maybe we want this set to 5. Let's see. Yeah, I think that makes a little bit more sense. I just didn't want it so extreme. So I think that works, and let's actually put all of our trees into a null just to organize. And I'm going to rename our disk to connector. We can actually hide our connector from both the viewport and the render view because I don't really want that in there. But let's cache our balloon tag here. So I'm going to highlight all the balloon tags and I'm going to hit cache scene. So the nice thing now is we can play this much faster because we've cached it, so it's stored. And yeah, it'll just make things easier to work with for us in the long run. So yeah, definitely recommend caching your sims. Let's move on now to the fun part, which is adding the hair. So the key thing here is the way that I set up the hair was I made polygon selections on each of these to the top parts of each like branch. And then I was able to add hair just to those polygon selections. So I'm going to show you that on one of the structures, and then you would just repeat that for the others. So let's do this one here. We're going to go up to our face view, and I'm going to change my selection to rectangle selection or lasso selection. I'm going to actually do lasso selection. And let's get at an angle here that's easy to work with. And I'm just going to select a top chunk like that. And I'm going to do that for the other little branch as well, holding shift and selecting. So once I have these selected, if I go up to select and then store selection, I can keep that and be able to select that whenever I want. So I'm going to name this tree 1 selection. And now I'm just going to repeat this process for the others. Okay, so now that I've got my selections on each of the trees, we can start adding our hair. So I'm also going to enable a backdrop just so I can kind of see the hair a little bit better as I work with it. I'm going to go back to object view and kind of increase the height and width and extension of our backdrop too. If we are on one of our objects and we have that selection like selected and made, it's highlighted. If we go up to simulate, hair objects, add hair, So when you add hair, it sometimes makes a new polygon selection, even if you already have a tag made. So in our case, it added it to the wrong one, and I just had to drag our originally created polygon selection, this tree one selection, into the link area for the hair guides. If we then go to editing and hit regrow and reroute, that'll just kind of ensure it's in the right place. But let's also change the length. I'm thinking maybe 45. And let's change the segments to maybe 15. There we have our hair. It's added on here. We need to change a few things because by default it's probably going to have its own gravity. If you didn't know that, the hair tag has its own forces going against it. So it has the normal default gravity number. So if we set this to 0 or 100, it will not fall, but it should be affected by the turbulence we have set. So as you can see, it's being affected and running with the simulation. Really nice. And sometimes you may hit go back to the start and it will do this. If it doesn't go back when you just click again, then you can always go back to that editing tab and regrow and reroute. Let's take a look at what the hair actually is looking like. So if we open our render view and dock this to the side and hit play, you're going to see the hair is going to look really funky. So yeah, this is the hair we're working with. The lighting is also off because we don't have a dome light in here yet. So let's do that actually while we're here. Let's pull in a dome light. And I'm going to use an HDRI, specifically from the HDRI folder. Let's try the HDR light for now, and we may change this later. But let's do that, and I'm going to set the intensity to 0.8. But yeah, as you can see, our hair is still pretty wacky looking and not very realistic. So there's a few things we can do to fix that. If you double click on the hair material icon itself, let's go to the thickness tab and set your root to like 0.1 and 0.1. Sometimes it just takes some finicking. I think we'll do that for now. But if you go back to this basic tab, you have all these options that you can start adding. So I like to add kink, clump, let's do length and frizz for sure. And already you can see we're working with something much more interesting, kind of like a dandelion. But let's go into frizz and let's change the frizz down to like 5. And the kink, I think we could take this maybe down to 15. And let's see, okay, I'm liking that. And then clump, I think we could keep clump, but let's change the radius to 1 and then the variation to 100. And then, yeah, I think I like that. Maybe we want to up the clump to 30. That's kind of fun and a little bit closer to what I had. I think I also maybe added some wave. Yeah, that looks right. Yeah, I think we'll keep that. So that's kind of the basic of how I set up the style of the hair itself. As far as color, I went with something pretty red. That'll change our base color, and it's kind of nice. But to be honest, we can push this a step further. And I don't think everybody knows this, but with hair, even though a hair material gets created, if you use Redshift, there's actually another material you want to add to get your hair looking even more realistic. So if we go up to create material and then go down to principled hair, and if you drag that onto your hair object here, click into your Redshift principled hair material, you're going to want to take albedo mix all the way up, and you're going to see our original hair color back in there. But now we have some other nice features we can work with, like this roughness. And if we take those up, you're going to see, look at that, much more vibrant hair already off the bat. So I really like playing with that. I also like to go into the variation here. You can add stray hair colors. So if we change this to kind of a yellow, and let's take this up here maybe. And then what you can do is you can increase the stray hair fraction. So at 0, we're not getting anything. And at 1, the whole thing will change to that color. But if we set it to like 0.2, it is going to scatter that stray hair throughout our base color. So I don't know if you can tell, if we say did this to 0.4, you'll see it. It'll just make more of the hairs in here have that stray hair color. So I'm going to set this back to 0.2. I just kind of want it to be scattered in. Go back to our original hair material and maybe make the roots a little bit more of that vibrant red. I'm going to rename the hair object to tree1 hair. now we can add this hair onto our other tree objects. And instead of like clicking and then simulating the hair again and changing all the settings, what you could also do is hold down Control, drag your hair object. Let's rename it to Tree 2 Hair. And then what we can do is if we go to our guide section, now we can just drag our secondary selection tag in here instead. So if we drag our Tree 2 selection, it'll look really funky in the viewport, but if you just hit regrow and reroute, it's going to correct that. So now we've already added our hair, and the nice thing is because we control dragged a copy, it has our materials already set up. So I'm just going to repeat that process for the others as well. So let's just hit play and see what we're working with. Pretty cool. So as you can see, we've got a lot of really fun movement, and I'm sure this looks pretty cool. Let's hit play in our render view just to get a feel of what those hairs look like. So I do think this is really interesting. However, in my render, you may have noticed that the hair has a little bit more structure. And the way we get that is actually by playing with some of the dynamic properties. So if we go back to our starting point, if we select all of our hair objects and go to Dynamics, there is this Properties tab and Modifiers tab. Let's focus first on Properties. We have all these things in here that are set up by default. Hold roots is one that can sometimes get you some odd bending right after the roots, because the roots are set to 80%, so they're going to be super stiff and hold that same position that they start with. So I like to usually take this down to like 20. But then also we have rest mix and rest hold. Rest hold is a really good one to play with, so you can change what stays stiff in what area of the hair, like the roots to the tip, what spot you want that to be holding its position. So if I set this to 100%, and if I go down here to modifiers, you'll see we have this curve for a rest hold, which we just changed to 100%. So if we go in here, and we don't change that curve at all yet, after having just set the rest hold to 100, these should not move at all. So as you can see, it's like a porcupine or some weird sea anemone. They're not moving at all because the rest hold was set to 100%. But if I go back and I change this rest hold curve to something like this, which this point on the left represents the hair roots and the point on the right represents the hair tips. So if we have this curve, what should happen is the roots hold, but the tips are curved and move around freely. So let's take a look. Yep, so as you can see, we've got movement on the tips of the hair, but the roots are keeping their hold. So to be honest, I think the curve is a little bit broken because as you can see, only the very, very, very ends of the hair are being affected, which I don't think is accurate to what this curve represents. So I actually like to drag this point a little bit more towards the middle, and then we should see more of the hairs moving. So there we go. I think that's pretty fun. So we do get some movement, but we still have a lot of that volume, almost like a dandelion. So I really like that. I think it's fun to keep it like that. But I do want to add a little bit of a rest mix, which will just keep the overall shape a little bit better. So I'm going to set this to maybe 5%, and let's take a look at what that's like. So that will just kind of keep the volume even further. Yeah, so we've got a nice mix here of movement, but still some hold and volume throughout the objects themselves. So I don't know why it's snapping like that at the beginning, just kind of an issue there. But that is the hair itself. Let's set up our camera so we can get a nice view and take a look at the render right now. I'm going to change the focal length here to 120, and that will bring us in. It will compress a lot of the focus here. And I'm going to go to a pretty low angle, and I'm going to move my camera down. Let's hit play on our IPR. So I think that's really fun. Maybe I want to zoom out a little bit though. Oh, and also, if you are not seeing hair in your render, don't freak out. What happened likely is the hair render option got unchecked in your render settings. So if you go into your render settings, you should have this hair render checked. If you don't see it at all, you can right click and then add the hair render. It will be in here. But I also am going to change some of my render settings. I don't want it to be 1280 by 720, but I am going to lock this ratio and set this to 1920 by 1080. and then change the resolution to 300 dpi. I'm also going to go into the advanced tab for redshift, and I'm going to set my threshold to maybe 0.1. I'm going to set Gauss to Lanczos and 6 for the filter size. If you want to turn on denoising, you are more than welcome to. I kind of like a grainy look, so I'm going to keep it off. But then I'm going to go into System, change the bucket size to 256, and open the memory section and change the used GPU memory down to 60 or 70. Either is great. Super fun. So again, the kind of nice thing is, you can go back in here, and if we double click on our hair material, the base hair material, since it's being used by all the others, if we affect it on one of them, it'll affect all the others. But it's really fun because then you can just go in here and you could change, say, the clump, set it to 50%, and it will affect all of them. Yeah, so I think you get something really nice, kind of like Dr. Seuss-y. It's really, really fun. So obviously the next thing is we don't have any material on our stems, so to speak. So let's create one. I'm going to open my material manager. I'm going to create a new standard material for redshift, and I'm just going to add that on top of our trees all together on the null folder that we created. So if we go in, double click on our material, I'm going to set the base color to be a bright pink kind of color like this. And I'm going to take the roughness up about halfway. And then I'm going to pull in 2 nodes here, the bump map node. Connect that. And then I'm also going to grab the tiles node. So I'm doing this because on my stems, I had kind of a fabric-y kind of pattern going on here. This is totally optional because ultimately we will add fuzz that will cover it. But yeah, if you want a nice texture on there, you could add the tiles node. This just kind of creates a brick-like texture. I'm going to change all these to be black and white. And then if we add this to our bump map and we hit solo, let's also disable our hair for now because it will slow down your rendering itself. You'll notice that we have this tile node working, but the way it's laid, the UVs are just kind of messed up. What I like to do is I like to click on the material on top of the null, and I'm going to just change the projection to cubic. Cool, so that fixes that. Let's also take our tiles node down in size with the global scale. Let's change this to maybe 0.1. Whoops. So I think that should be good. Let's unsolo it, and you'll see we've got this fun little grid-like texture on there. So the other nice thing is the tiles node itself has a bunch of pattern options. By default it's set to squares, but I use this often when making fake fabric. I set it to weave, and then we've got this like knit looking texture. You can also set it to, I think, hexagons and circles is kind of fun for like scales. So that should just be a fun thing to mess with. I think I will keep it on hexagons actually. And I'm going to change the bump map intensity height scale to maybe 0.2. I don't want it super intense. And that's really the gist of that material. But I also added tiny fuzz to all of the trees. Let's pause our IPR for now. Select one of the trees you're working with, and if you have that selection already made, great. If not, again, you can just click on the tag and hit select, and it should select those faces. And make sure you're in the face view to actually see that. Then we just need to go to the select menu and hit invert, select again, and then store that selection. So now we just have the inverse of what we made originally. So I'm just going to call this tree 1 base. And I'm going to do this step for all the others. Before we make the other hairs, let's organize a bit here. So we're going to call this main hairs, will be the name of this null, and I'm going to drag all our main hairs in there. And then I'm going to create a new null, and we're going to call this tiny hairs. And I'm going to bring this above our main hairs. And let's reopen our trees folder, select the first one that we want to work with, and we're going to go up to simulate again, hair objects, add hair. I think we had an issue here. Let's just go back to the start. So tree 1, have it selected. Let's go to simulate, hair object, add hair. Okay, don't know what's happening here. Let me try. Okay, so yeah, I just made some weird polygon selections again. You can just delete those. Just make sure that in the guides you swap out the linked selection here for your tree base selection that you make. And then obviously we don't need these to be really long. I had really short little hairs on here, so maybe 4 centimeters. And actually we can disable dynamics because these I want to move with the trees and not have any forces kind of acting on them. So I'm going to turn off gravity and I'm going to disable dynamics. I'm going to change the thickness again to like 0.2 and 0.2. And I'm also going to create a new redshift material for this, for the hair, and drag that on top. And then I'm going to pull the albedo mix up like before, roughness as well. And then I'm going to also pull the stray hair fraction all the way up. I want this to be a light pinkish orange color. This is going to be called Tree 1 Fuzz. So if we just preview that, as you can see, this is the fuzz that we're working with. So I might even take the thickness down to 0.1 and 0.1. And I don't think I need as many little hairs that we have on here. So I might go to the hairs tab, and it's set by default to 50,000. I might change this to 20,000. Yeah, something like that is a little bit more reasonable. And then I'm going to go back to our original hair material here, and I'm going to add the things like we did before, like kink and frizz and maybe length. I don't know if we need clumping. We can try a little bit of that. And maybe wave. But yeah, I think I want to take the clumping down because we don't need that so much. Maybe only 3%. I'm going to just repeat this process like we did for the first hair for the others. So again, remember, if you drag and copy the hair layer for that fuzz, then if you drag the new selection for the second tree into there and hit regrow and reroute, it will automatically put the hairs in the right selection area. So now we have all our fuzz layers. Let's drag that into the null we created. We've now got fuzz on all of our layers. So now we can just re-enable the other hairs just to get a look at what we're working with. But here we are. That is the starting frame, so obviously we probably don't want to preview that. Really fun. Cool. I'm also going to go back in and change our original hair color here. And I'm going to play a little bit with the actual setup of our scene. So I'm going to go outside of our camera, but turn on that camera view here so it stays on there even as I work around my scene. I'm going to try playing with a few other dome lights. I do want to also make one final material for our backdrop. New material. I'm going to pull in a ramp node, connect that to the color. Let's also change the mapping to circular. I really like doing this just to add a more interesting backdrop and just kind of some color variation. So I'm going to change the colors maybe to like a purpley. Yeah, shades of red are just kind of fun. Anything warm toned is always a good time. Okay, so let's see. I like what we're working with here. I think we're pretty much done. I'm going to go back into our camera view. I might go to the optical tab, enable some aperture and set this to like 4, and then use this icon here to kind of select my focus point. But yeah, I'm just going to render this one out. This is really how you achieve this fun like Lorax looking bouquet. Hope you guys had a blast following along. Hope you learned something, and I can't wait to see all the beautiful bouquets you come up with. Thanks so much for watching. Sorry it's been a hot minute since my last tutorial too. I was just doing a small little freelance project with Maxon, nothing crazy, just did the 2025 September release animations, no big deal. Totally huge, blew my mind that I got the chance to do that, so I'm really hoping to find proper way to kind of break those scenes down for you guys in the future, and I will keep you posted. But yeah, in the meantime, more tutorials are coming. I hope you're excited, and best of all, happy creating. I'll catch you guys in the next video. See ya!